Good morning, Boker Tov Earth. Today we're going to talk about the prophecy of Mashiach and Mashiach ben David. So we need to understand this prophecy of the tribes of Israel, Jewish people, Am Yisrael. We need to understand the requirements of Mashiach, right? Before anybody could stand up, there's people over the internet. They're all like, hey, I'm Messiah. Hey, I'm Mashiach, right? But that doesn't make that true, right? People say things all the time out of pocket. Maybe they're having delusions of grandeur, but it's not true. If I'm going to say to you, Ani Mashiach ben David, and that means in Hebrew, I am Mashiach ben David, then I would need to explain to you why I am Mashiach ben David. Right? I can't just say, I'm Mashiach ben David. What do you mean? How do you know? These are the questions you should ask. Anybody should ask. Somebody that's going to get up and say, I'm Mashiach ben David. I might be Mashiach ben David, but how could you know? You don't know how to evaluate who is Mashiach ben David. So we need to look at the requirements for Mashiach and talk about it, right? So let's do that. If somebody's going to say to you, I'm Mashiach, great, but why and how, right? Hold on, let me fix this layout. Great. So the first thing we need to understand is that Mashiach is a male. So if there's a girl out there on the internet saying, I'm Mashiach ben David, she doesn't qualify. Why? Good question. Mashiach ben David is a title. It simply means in Hebrew, Messiah from Ben David. Who's David? King David. So Israel once had a kingdom. The tribes of Israel, 12 tribes under one kingdom. And there were a line of kings. King David is the most famous. He has an entire book of Psalms that graces both the Tanakh and the New Testament. So the prophecy of my people, of the tribes of Israel, is that one day in the future would come a Redeemer who would be anointed king again, and the reestablishment of the kingdom of Israel. And this person will become king. That's really the prophecy. But for that person to be king, again, they have to meet the requirements, right? The Jewish people need to know who they're looking for. So the prophecy gave requirements that have been refined to understand who are they looking for. These are some objective requirements. So you have to be a man, and you have to have ancestry that traces back to King David. You have to do that. Personally, I am a male, and my last name is Weintraub, which is a winemaker, which winemakers are very important back in the kingdom. So you could probably say that my ancestry traces back to King David. Now, some things I didn't put in here, but they're important to know, is that Mashiach has a certain type of soul. So if you study the prophecy and talk to our people and the wisdom keepers, you have to understand the soul of Mashiach. So the soul of Mashiach requires a special type, obviously, of elevated soul. But there are traits of that soul that are requirements for Mashiach. For example, Mashiach has to be a musician. You might say, why is that? Mashiach has to be a musician because music is the highest form of prayer. And through song and through the prayer of song, one can reach the ears of the angels and carry those prayers to the Lord. with urgency, haste, and purity. So it is taught, essentially. The other thing to know about Mashiach that most don't know, even in this prophecy, is that Mashiach actually has to be a shaman or a curandero. And that has to do with part of the Messianic Torah. But we'll get to that in a minute. So Mashiach is responsible for bringing the lost tribes back from exile. 2,700 years ago, over 2,700 years ago, 10 of our tribes from the north were exiled, never to be seen again. And if you ask most members of the tribe of Israel, which in modern day is known as the tribe of Judah, which is hence the word Jewish comes from, Jews or Judeans, most Jews do not know where our cousins and relatives went. I know where they went because I'm in contact with them. But the lost tribes were scattered to the four corners of the earth, as the prophecy indicates. The reason I know of these lost tribes and I know many of their leaders is because I care deeply about the redemption of my people. And so my organization, Heal Earth, Tikkun Olam, is dedicated to this fulfillment of ancient prophecy. And in January of 2024, I'm proud to report that an Indigenous embassy was launched in Jerusalem. So I can bring that up. Anyways, this embassy of elders from around the world was set up as a vessel for the lost tribes of Israel, in addition to all of the indigenous nations that support our ongoing process for decolonization of our ancestral homelands. So you can check that out at indigenousembassy.org. And their headquarters is in Jerusalem. So Mashiach has to bring these tribes back from exile. Okay. So if I'm saying to you, I'm Mashiach ben David, I should have some evidence, right? That I'm doing something, making some effort to work with tribal elders from around the world at the United Nations. And not only that, have some fruits of that effort, like establishment of an indigenous embassy for the lost tribes of Israel. You probably need some type of claim like that if you're going to say that you're Mashiach ben David like me. The next step would be essentially the rebuilding of the third temple. This is the hardest part because you really have to be anointed for this. Now, Mashiach has to give the blessing for the Beit HaMikdash. It's a prophecy of our people. But that is in some ways an act and will of God. So anybody can say they're Mashiach, but there's got to be people out there who are looking at what you're doing and going, no, this is the person. And we know. Now, what is interesting is that the Temple Institute exists in Israel. We can pull up that website as well. Let's see if I can resize this browser tab, huh? There we go. So this is the Temple Institute. Dude, email pop-ups are the worst. Like, I know we all want people's emails so that we can be better at getting our message out. But can we please just invent a better way to ask for the email than pop-up? Just like any other way. So Temple Institute, dedicated to their building of the Holy Temple. This thing's been around, as far as I'm aware, maybe they started in the 80s, maybe earlier, working on temple artifacts, stuff like that. And only within the last couple of years did something really big happen. So this is how we know Mashiach ben David is essentially imminent and returning, because the Temple Institute, red heifers. Actually, I have this on the web. Great. So, unblemished red heifers have been brought to Israel. Those red heifers are part of ancient prophecy, law of Moses, of our people, that basically says for these types of ceremonies to be conducted, we need the ashes of a red heifer to be sacrificed for that. And that's happened. So 5 heifers came from Texas. Interestingly enough, about 2 hours from my house. And were flown to Israel. These are the most pure type of red heifer that you can get. And they've been there for a couple years. And so there's a window for that. So we know Mashiach's return is imminent, because those have to be sacrificed to begin that process for the third temple. And that is part of the ancient prophecy of Mashiach, that Mashiach ben David. And the reason you'd know he's Mashiach ben David is he would accomplish these things. Now, the other aspect of this is the reincarnation of Mashiach ben Yosef. So when you get into the prophecy of Mashiach, of the Jewish people, and you speak with the elders, you'll learn that there are 2 Mashiachs. And that's confusing, right? 2 Mashiachs. How can that be? Now, it's said that Mashiach ben Yosef comes before Mashiach ben David. Mashiach ben Yosef is known as a suffering Messiah. He's known to basically enter Jerusalem on a donkey, that he's to suffer for his people, he's to be killed. And that Mashiach ben David would come after him, and he would be anointed king and redeemer. Now, the interesting thing is that, and the reason I put that Mashiach ben Yosef, or Mashiach ben David, has to be a reincarnation of Mashiach ben Yosef, is because I do the research on the prophecies, right? I'm not just up here, I'm this, I'm that, blah, blah, blah. You know, come with some evidence, come with some facts, right? Habibi. So, to understand the prophecies, to understand that rabbinical authorities, learned rabbis who really, really study this stuff, have agreed and out advanced Torah research and certification that proves that Mashiach ben David would be the reincarnation of Mashiach ben Yosef. That's interesting, because a lot of people have interpretations of the prophecy, but just interpretation doesn't mean your interpretation is correct. Okay? I'm bringing it up for a very important point. Because to say that you're the reincarnation of Mashiach ben Yosef requires explanation. Well, who is Mashiach ben Yosef? If you're Mashiach ben David, if I'm Mashiach ben David, I need Mashiach ben David, then I would have had to been Mashiach ben Yosef, but then I would have to prove my reincarnation. That's tough. Because to prove the reincarnation of one's soul, you might have to prove the science of reincarnation. See, if your anointing or elevation as a normal person to become the king of an entire kingdom that hasn't existed for over 3,000 years and fulfill ancient prophecy, you're going to have to do something crazy. So I wrote an open source book. It's called The Science of Reincarnation, where I explain exactly that. And I've moved it into my workbook. Sorry, that's The Science of Torah. The Science of Reincarnation. So I have it right here if you'd like to explore the science of reincarnation. That reincarnation is not just some woo stuff. It is both a central tenet and teaching of the tribes of my people. It may not be the most popularized teaching today, and that is unfortunate. That most Jews are not taught about the central tenet of reincarnation. I was not taught this. I grew up Reform Judaism, which I must say I reject. I reject Reform Judaism. But reincarnation has always been an understanding of indigenous people. Go talk to tribes all around the world. They all share this same understanding of the core teaching. And not only do we have this core teaching, but we have the science to back it up. So I've gone through countless books that detail the academic research, scientific research with validity, showing how children up to the age of 7 can remember their past lives if they have parents who are adept at understanding where they're coming from. Research institutions like at the University of Virginia, the Department of Perceptual Studies, like the works of Dr. Ian Stevenson and his colleague Jim Tucker, who have really formalized the science of past life research. So you would need to, again, if you're going to claim that you're Mashiach ben David, right? You'd need to be able to prove your understanding of reincarnation. So if you do that, maybe you're still eligible, right? You're eligible. But here's where your eligibility might stop, because you might have understood the science of reincarnation. It's out there. Your soul might be tapped into it, but you may not understand who is Mashiach ben Yosef. And I know my people, they're not going to like this because there's cognitive dissonance, and for good reason. Now, before I unveil that mystery, I want to talk about the Messianic Torah. This is where the part where I mentioned earlier that Mashiach has to be a shaman comes into play. Why does Mashiach have to be a shaman? Because shamans are curanderos. And just to give you an idea, I'm using shaman because you probably have a contextual awareness of that word. Indigenous people do not like the word shaman at all. Healer, curandero, facilitator, much better words. But I think on average, most people have this perception that shaman's the word to use. Anyways, For thousands of years, my people have been hunted, raped, murdered, colonized, appropriated, and taken advantage of. And that sucks. We have a lot of ancestral trauma because of it. And as a result of that, we have lost an ancient practice. Back in our old temples, way back in the day, we used to have our priests pray with psychedelic sacraments like DMT. DMT, which is one of the main ingredients you can extract from the acacia wood. Acacia wood is a tree that grows natively in the land of Eretz Yisrael. It is the wood that our people consider sacred. It is wood that we're only allowed to use for certain things, like we did for the tabernacle, which is the Ark of the Covenant. Okay, and from that wood, we can extract DMT. That's all backed by science. And not only is it backed by science, but my claim that we used to have psychedelic sacraments and psychedelic ceremonies is also backed by science and archaeology. If you go to Sepharia, you can read the work of Rabbi Harry Rosenberg, who breaks down a rabbinical authority for the use of psychedelic sacraments in the old temples amongst the Jewish people. Furthermore, go search Google. You will find in our old temples and our altars the use of cannabosum, which is cannabis. We used cannabis oil. You can go read about King Solomon, who was anointed using holy anointing oils, which contain cannabosum, or essentially hash oil today. So we have that legacy of our people, but we have forgotten it because we have been persecuted for so long. So part of unveiling the Messianic Torah is rediscovering a really central component to our indigenous way of life, which is ceremonies with sacred plant medicines. As God commanded in the Bereshit, in the first book of Genesis, that he made all the plants and declared them good. And yet today, there's such a frustrating thing today. All of the worlds have made God's natural medicines illegal. Sad, but true. And so for the elevation of human consciousness or the spreading of Mashiach consciousness, we have to have the Messianic Torah. And so the reason Mashiach has to be a shaman is that he would have had to rediscover the lost Torah of his people by spending time with the tribes who kept the lost Torah, but it has been lost to most of the people. So this would be an essential tenet of the Messianic Torah, which would be, or is to be, unveiled to the people of Am Yisrael. So if you figured all that out, still eligible. You're still eligible if you figured all that out to be Mashiach ben David. So still eligible. But the saving grace is that you still got to answer the question, who is Mashiach ben Yosef? You might have done all that. You tricked all the rabbis, and they're like, we know this guy's a Mashiach. And they ask, who's Mashiach ben Yosef? But you don't know. Sorry, son. And in that case, you're just shit out of luck. There was once a Jewish rabbi, very learned man, wise man. You may have heard his name, some of you. Jesus Christ, Yeshua HaMashiach. You may have heard of him. He's like this Jewish rabbi, Second Temple era, 2,000 years ago. Anyways, crazy kid, right? This guy was like a spiritual prodigy at 13. Left his home, and he disappears for like 17 years, right? And it's like, where does he go? Where does this like spiritual prodigy go? Well, if he's a spiritual prodigy and knew about his people, he'd be interested in the fulfillment of the prophecy of his people, because that prophecy that we were just talking about all those things remain true 2,000 years ago. And so this guy, Jesus Christ, Yeshua HaMashiach, he wanders. 17 years he wanders. Where does he go? Some claim first he goes southish into Egypt. And from Egypt, he finds his way all the way to the Himalayas, to the Hindu Pass, to Afghanistan, Iraq, all that area. He wanders. Learned the area back in the day. Iraq, Afghanistan, Kashmir, India, Egypt. Learned places with many spiritual secrets and schools. And so Jesus, he left and he went to study with all these masters and to seek out some of the lost tribes, lost tribes, which can be found in places today like Afghanistan. And so in India, in the Himalayas, at the Heifers monastery in Ladakh, the northernmost part of India, some swamis found some ancient manuscripts there that spoke of this man, Jesus, and that he came to India and he studied with many people, the Zoroastrians and the Buddhists and all these folks. And he was wise and he learned the healing of hands and he learned all the spiritual truths and he mastered them with such ease that they anointed him a title, Son of Man, a living Buddha. And their records indicate that at the age of 30, he left. After 17 years, he left and was sent back home to bring back the word of God. And it's interesting because if you read the New Testament, it speaks about Jesus Christ around that same age, about a year later, maybe 30, maybe 31, maybe left at 29, 30, showing up to the Galilee and beginning his teaching. And it's interesting if you understand the Jewish people, because this rabbi, to be a rabbi, by the way, you have to be married in Jewish culture. And so this rabbi, he fell in love with an amazing woman. And history books call her Mary Magdalene. And Mary Magdalene was an interesting woman. She's very wealthy. It's told that she supported financially the ministry of this rabbi Jesus. But the question is, where did Mary's money come from? And many claim that the ancestry of Mary is of royal origin, that perhaps her father was a king of one of the lost tribes or one of the tribes, or perhaps her family was descendants of a king from which they got their wealth. Now, this would only make sense in the event that if Jesus, when he came back and was teaching and doing the healing of the hands and giving sight to the blind and trying to do all these things, it would only make sense then for him to call himself a Melchizedek. Melchizedek, or a member of the order of Melchizedek. And for the Jewish people, many don't know, Melchizedek, high priest, greeted our ancestor Avraham when he came to Jerusalem, originally called Salem. Melchi in Hebrew meaning king, Sedek meaning righteous one, so king of righteousness. And Avraham was so impressed by this Melchizedek, he gave him 10% of everything ever made. One of the richest men ever of all time. But Jewish people don't talk about him too much. And so Jesus shows up, is telling people he's a Melchizedek from this order, coming from this Qumran community of the Essenes, or having associations with them. As John the Baptist, his relative, was a member of the Essenes. They had many ancient prophecies, which would only be discovered in 1942 with the unveiling of the Qumran scrolls. Many know them as the Dead Sea Scrolls. Nevertheless, this rabbi had an interesting claim, not just as a holy man, but potentially as a rightful king of the tribes of Israel. Now, at this time, we know that the Pharisees who were running essentially what was left of the kingdom, that those Pharisees were corrupt, that they were essentially trust fund kids whose parents had bought them these positions and roles. And not only were they kind of trust fund kids who were corrupt, but they didn't really understand even the law of Torah. They were so obsessed with following the mitzvot, or the idea that the mitzvot were the commandments, that they weren't actually helping the people, right? People who might be going hungry or sick. They're too busy doing the mitzvot to recognize what really matters, which is God's children. And so Jesus was doing these things, and he said, well, I'm Mashiach. And they said, no, you can't be Mashiach. And maybe he said, I'm also king. I'm the rightful king here. And he wanted to get the tribes back together and organize and gather and do all this. And the Pharisees, they were afraid of this man. So they told the spies in Rome about him. And they told the spies in Rome that there is this guy, and they said, okay, well, we'll watch it. And as he became more famous and was healing people, and his sermons grew, and he's preaching to the Gentiles, doing many things that were disrespectful to the authorities of the day, going into a temple which had lost its holiness and flipping tables over and rebuking them. It would lead to a point of no return. That eventually Rome would call for his death. He would be arrested by hundreds of soldiers and sentenced to death. And he was killed. And amazingly enough, a miracle happened. By the grace of God, he was resurrected. And we know that that story has been told for thousands of years because the 12 apostles of Christ, all Jews, went out into the world to share the good news and the good word of the Lord. And they were all killed for that. They were all killed for that. And in the Holy Roman Empire for 300 years, those who believed in the ways of the Messiah, of the Mashiach ben Yosef, of Christ, they too were killed as terrorists because they taught that men and women were equal, ancient and everlasting children of God, and they preached that women should not be held as chattel or slaves, that they should be free. And those in power did not like this. So what did they do? They worked together to call for, the head of the empire called for the formalization of the church and the advent of the Bible. Now we should go back to the death of Christ because I did forget to mention something. This relates to the aristocratic lineage of Jesus' wife, Mary Magdalene. See, after the death of Christ, Mary Magdalene has been said to have an audience with the emperor Tiberius. But how could a woman who's bourgeoisie have an audience with royalty? She could not. She would be turned away at the gates. An emperor would only allow a relative or one of royal blood to be in their presence in this way. So Mary showed up with an egg. So the story goes, and told about the resurrection of Christ. And they scoffed and laughed, and then the egg changed color to red. And they didn't understand the miracle before them. I'm telling you all this to explain something, which is that at the advent of formal Christianity into the Holy Roman Empire, as they call it, and the development of the formalized New Testament, key teachings of Jesus were excluded. One of those key teachings, and one of the things the empire did, was ban the use of psychedelic sacraments. They did that because they could not get the terrorists, or what they called Christian terrorists, from continuing to preach this message of God. So why did they outlaw Christians holding ceremonies with sacred sacraments? To stop them from finding the kingdom within themselves. And so we know that Jesus was working with these sacred sacraments. And we know that he could have been exposed to them through his studies with the Zoroastrians, which maintain these ceremonies, with the Egyptians, with his own people, maybe in certain parts. with the Buddhists who maintain these ceremonies and others, even the Hindus. So we know that Jesus was working with psychedelic medicines to heal the people and give sight to the blind, because we have the archaeological evidence today that much of the wine back at that time was psychedelic in nature, and that other psychedelic elements were available to the people. This is the basis of a book that I wrote, and the original premonition for part of the book comes from a very renowned author, Brian Marescu. So we have both rabbinical authority, which says the Jews, we used to be doing this work with psychedelics. We have the anecdotal evidence that all other tribes are having these ceremonies with psychedelics. And now we have an understanding that Jesus Christ was also healing with psychedelics. He was a psychedelic activist. The reason that's important is because if you're going to say Mashiach ben David, you also have to say that I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one else gets to the Father except through me. I am the way, the truth, and the life that lives in you. Because if you're going to say that you're Mashiach ben David, you also have to understand and be able to prove that you and the Father are one. I am the Father are one. You have to be able to prove that your soul was once the master they call Christ. Christ being an English word to describe the word Mashiach. Christ being a follower of Messiah. So you would have to do all of that to truly be Mashiach ben David. Ani Mashiach ben David. I am Mashiach ben David. Because I am all of those things. And all of those things are true. It's a crazy story. It's a good story. Now, I told you all of that. And you could go, well, Matt, that was well researched. Good story. A lot of things that, need some fact checking, whatever. But the true testament of this video being true would be that I would post this video on the internet and that something would happen, right? Because I can make this video and I can say, oh, I am Mashiach ben David. And I can say, oh, well, also I figured out that crazy story. I figured out I'm the reincarnation of Christ. I can say I know that. And I can even say that I am the way, the truth, and the life that lives in you. That I am the Alpha and Omega. That I am the light and I am love. And I could know all that. Even then, it's tough, right? Because you might go, well, it doesn't seem insane, but he definitely is crazy. Valid. But something would have to happen if I were to post this video, right? I can't just make videos and claim things if things don't happen. If I'm claiming things and things aren't happening, then I'm not Mashiach. Because the last thing that we need to know about Mashiach is that the universe conspires for the will of Mashiach. So Mashiach would have to say things like, I used to work in technology. I used to work in technology, but then I had a spiritual awakening. I felt God calling me. And I found healing in South America with ayahuasca and found a new path for myself to train as a healer, a curandero, a facilitator. And then as I did that, I began to unfold awareness about my path. And then I became a psychedelic activist to advocate for the healing of these medicines. And along that way, I found that it was healing our veterans. And then as I got involved with that to heal our veterans with this plant medicine, amazing things started happening. That as I got involved with it, we started changing state laws in places like Texas. Texas, the most conservative place in the country, that I helped invent a bipartisan policy approach to policy reform regarding psychedelic medicine and using it for the treatment of PTS in veterans and ending veteran suicide. And that organization, that movement grew to the point where it now spans across the United States, that there's initiatives all across the United States, that we have organizations in Washington, D.C. and our allies. That would all have to be true, right? That the universe is conspiring to make essentially the vision of Mashiach come true. So I'd have to be able to say to you that after being a psychedelic activist for a couple years, the creation of something like the Veteran Mental Health Leadership Coalition in Washington, D.C., which is led by a 3-star Marine general working to bring awareness to Congress and the Senate, the Department of Defense, and all our avenues to help heal our veterans. And not only that, again, my claim would have to be true, right? The claim that psychedelic medicine is true. And we have all the science today. So I'd have to be able to prove the science of the indigenous wisdom and upon which I'm imparting. So if you can do all of that, again, then you would be closer and closer to being Mashiach. I'm just saying I have a couple things that I can point to, like Texas House Bill 1802. I have it right there on my wall. Or this organization, or my organization, Heal America DAO, pointing to these things. That would be signs. Signs that what I'm saying is true. But the ultimate sign would be that something crazy happens, that I post this video and somehow it goes viral, that I post this video and that somehow at some point after it, I am unveiled as Mashiach ben David. That's the only way. That's the only way that this isn't a fantasy. Even if I can document each measurable step. So many people on the internet will claim that there are these things, but they have to be able to tie it all together. And so some of this truth is tough even for the Jewish people because of the trauma with the Christians or the infrastructure of Christianity, which have been invaded by what our people describe as the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, or the force of the Satan, Satan, a Hebrew word meaning adversary of God, and that Satan, as an adversary of God, is infiltrated. All vessels, all religious vessels are infiltrated with Satan to bring deception, confusion, distortion into the world. And so I did forget the last thing also that Mashiach would have to do is that Mashiach, aside from, in order to create the conditions of world peace, which would be helping people discover how to find inner peace, because it's a do-it-yourself inner process creates outer peace, is that Mashiach also has to defeat the heir of Rav. This is the last piece. The heir of Rav are part of a legendary prophecy of the Jewish people of tribes. The heir of Rav are essentially what you might call modern colonialists, what we call Babylon. Babylon is a belief system. It's also a government. Some people call it the formal name that they have chosen for themselves. Excuse me. It's kind of embarrassing. They call themselves the New World Order. Oh, we're the New World Order. You're not new. You've been around thousands of years. I know who you are. We know who you are. And when I say me, I mean military intelligence around the world, generals around the world, people that are really actually working to prevent the people and prevent all these things, know about the New World Order. We know about the New World Order. You're not new. You're not a world order. You're the cult of Babylon. And you reject the laws of God. And the prophecy of our people says that Babylon will fall. Just as Prophet Bob Marley said, Babylon will fall. That's the prophecy. So Mashiach also has to be very good at identifying heir of Rav, fighting through the noise of the matrix, and working to defeat the heir of Rav. This is the role of Mashiach ben David. Mashiach ben David is less prayerful peasant and more humble warrior. Because if you're Mashiach ben David, you are fighting a war against Yetzer Hara, against the evil inclination. And you'd have to understand what that is. You'd have to understand Ezekiel 38:39. You'd have to understand what is Gog and Magog. You'd have to understand the prophecies of our people, which is that we are in the early stages of the war of Gog and Magog. You'd have to understand also Islamic prophecy, which is obviously related to our cousins, the Ishmaelites, from which we share an ancestor. You'd have to understand the prophecy of the Ajjal, or the Muslims' version of essentially those who oppose Christ, those who oppose Mashiach, those who oppose God. You'd have to understand that. You'd have to understand why Iran and the Ajjal, Ayatollah Khomeini, is doing these things to attack Israel and God's people. You'd have to understand that. You'd have to understand the role that Satan has in forming all of those things to become true. You'd have to understand Satan's role in the world and his ability, that energy force's ability to create mass confusion, distortion, and lies. You'd have to know that you are the truth and say, I am the truth, the way, and the life, because you'd have to know what the truth is in order to separate it from the lies. And only by following the truth and the way of God could your people be redeemed. So if you can do all of that and full time be working to defeat love, then you're Mashiach ben David. I know I'm Mashiach ben David because I took all of my life savings, because God asked me to spend them on doing the best I could in my own way to bring about the redemption of my people. And so I've done all of these things for my people to end this exile, because I love my people and I love you and I want a redemption and I want God's kingdom. And the last thing I'll say is this. Yeshua HaMashiach taught his followers a prayer. This prayer, he would say something like, Dear Heavenly Father, Mother, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Thank you for our daily bread. And he would say this for two reasons. Because he told his followers, and he prophesied. He was a prophet. He was Messiah. He said, I'll come again. And they said, well, how do you know? He said, well, here's your signs. I'll come at the end of the age, and you'll know me by these signs. Listen for me. Watch for me. Eventually, you'll see me. You'll see the signs in the stars and the skies. And so all the signs of our people have come true. And any rabbi would tell you that they say, oh, Mashiach's imminent. He should come now. So Jesus said that because he understood the prophecy. He understood, and he said that I would return. So if you're going to say you're Mashiach ben David, you'd have to know who was Mashiach ben Yosef and why he would come back. And you'd need to familiarize yourself with all of these things. And so that is the last responsibility of Mashiach ben David, to defeat the Erev Rav, to defeat that satanic Islam, which is coming out of Iran, to fight that battle of the Lord, to know that the Lord is only bringing that forward to bring unity to the tribes, to bring about the restoration of the kingdom, to bring about the unveiling of Mashiach ben David, so that there can, unfortunately, hopefully we can avoid it, but unfortunately there will be a war, a great war, to defeat satanic Islam and the values of that, which are anti-life, anti-God, anti-Allah, if you will. And that at the defeat of satanic Islam and the defeat of the Erev Rav, then the world could begin a process of healing and redemption, and that the tribes of Israel could fulfill their oath and duty that they swore to the Lord. If you're born into the lives, if you're born into the tribes of Am Yisrael, if you take that upon yourself, you have a duty to the Lord. We are called God's chosen people, not because we're chosen to suffer, though it does seem like it. It does seem like we were chosen to suffer. We were chosen as God's people to maintain and uphold the laws of God, the laws of nature, of natural law, which we call Torah. We're called God's chosen people because we are not even more than that. We are to dedicate our lives and the resources of our lives and the resources of our kingdom, the kingdom of Israel, to the healing, restoration, and guardianship of Mother Earth. So we are not to be unto like the nations. We are to be unto God. That is who we first serve. And we are to imbue all systems of governance and finance and infrastructure on the earth with the laws of Torah. And by elevating those and making those things holy, that the world will be made holy in the image of the Lord. And that would accomplish and bring about the generation of Mashiach, because Mashiach ben David is not just, Messiah, king, where's the title? No, he is but a leader. For a king needs followers. To create the advent of Mashiach consciousness, of Christ consciousness, the elevation of human consciousness to a godly level, which would lead to the restoration, revelation, and unity of all of the human family. For now, and for 7 generations down the line, for 1,000 years of glory and peace to come. So, Baruch Adonai El Shaddai El Elyon Yahweh, blessed be the name of the Almighty Lord, the Most High, Yahweh Eya Asher Eya, all that is and will be. Shalom Aleichem, Habibi.